Hello, everyone. It's Brenda back again, and I'm so excited to bring in Jessica Metcalfe, Dr. Jessica Metcalfe, I should say.
I'm so excited to be here. So thank you so much for having me.
And for everyone listening, Jessica teaches self-intelligence by sharing the link between imposter syndrome, perfectionism, and burnout. But prior to that, let's go back a
Mhm.
little bit in time because we'll talk about like where you are now and where you're kind of going. But prior to that, you were in dentistry.
Mhm. So I graduated from dentistry in 2015 and completed a residency program in treating special needs and medically compromised patients. I always found a love for the critical thinking and the problem solving that came with the complexity around individuals' medical histories. And from there, I ended up at one of the top five world renowned cancer centers, Princess Margaret in Toronto, Ontario, which is where I was a staff dentist and an education director there.
Okay. And then this switch into
Yeah.
life coaching, talking about self-intelligence, working with
Yeah.
leaders inside organizations. What
Yeah.
was the impetus to make that change, that shift?
So it's really fascinating because I started lecturing and speaking first on how to improve a patient's quality of life post cancer therapy to the medical and dental community. And at the exact same time, I realized there was a lot of emotions that come around or the mental load that comes with treating medically compromised patient that I for myself take for granted because to me it came very natural. So
Mhm.
what I started to do was sprinkle in ways on how to manage your emotions when treating very complex individuals. And at the exact same time, I've always known this. When I decided I wanted to be a dentist at 14, people would always come to me and be like, well, but don't dentists have one of the highest suicide rates? And so what I started
Do
to
they?
do, yeah, we're still top three at this point in time. So what are we now? Like over 20 years later, and we're still we're still top three.
I had no idea. Sorry to interject, but I'm
Yeah.
like, wait just a second.
No,
We can pause on that for a second. Wow.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So because of that, I was like, you know what? Complexity with the patients, the emotional load that comes with it, and then the stats that still exist within the dental community, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start to sprinkle in ways on how the clinician can start to take care of themselves. And in doing so, I use my social media platform to then be able to share with others tips and tricks and strategies. And at the exact same time that that was happening, people were like, hey, can you start speaking on this? So I did. And it was a very natural progression for me. And at the exact same time, I was actually diagnosed with depression, a generalized anxiety disorder, and was experiencing what I now know to be as my third burnout. And because of that, I was like, you know what? If this is what I'm going through, I'm at the research center. It was really natural for me to dive into the research and understanding of
Mhm.
why this is happening and understanding the studies behind it. I'm going to start presenting this. And from there, I slowly started to step away from teaching the clinical component and started teaching the non-clinical component. And now that is what I solely teach. And I fully stepped into the role of consulting and helping leaders and entrepreneurs and C-suite levels so then they can manage not just themselves, but prevent burnout within their team as well.
Love it. And you've written a book, Speak Kindly, You're Listening, which is such a
Mm-hmm.
beautiful title.
Thank
Um,
you.
like it's such a compassionate title. And it's all around empowering your inner voice.
Yeah.
So has
So,
that been
yeah.
like, is that always been something that you've wanted to do, write a book? Has that like been a passion project of yours?
Yeah. So it's interesting because when I've journaled my own experiences, I've always thought that, okay, a part of this is going to go into a book at some point. And for the past few years, I've dabbled in, okay, am I going to write something that's fiction related? I wrote a book one point that was fiction related, but based on my dating life, and then decided that, okay, no, this isn't the space that I needed to be in. And so the lecture topics that I was talking on, I thought, well, this is the opportunity to be able to take everything that comes from my lectures, all the research that I learned, my client stories, my stories, and be able to put it in a compact area so other high achievers can then find this and be able to start to make changes and understand why they're experiencing what they're experiencing.
Love it. So why do we struggle with imposter syndrome?
One of the reasons, especially as a high achiever, top performer who has perfectionist tendencies, we tend to put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And what ends up happening is we take that pressure and we don't give ourselves the opportunity to be able to step into our successes and our wins.
Mhm.
And it is that much easier to keep reaching that goal and setting those standards and at times unrealistic expectations. And we're just now checking off the box.
Right.
And so when we don't digest and dive into our own successes, then we can just get stuck in that exact same space of thinking, okay, well, I'm not good enough, and overextending ourselves and underestimating our abilities. And for the individual who just keeps checking the boxes but doesn't want to share facts about what they've accomplished
Yeah.
because they feel it's bragging, then it's hard to be able to accept, oh, these are all the skills. This is my knowledge. These are my capabilities. These are my wins. And I can acknowledge them to be able to go out and apply for that promotion or support my team or start a business.
How can leaders help support employees that might be going through a bit of imposter syndrome? Like if, you know, if they're seeing like a team member or their employee in their group not, you know, volunteering to take on something because they might be, I mean, it's not like I'm saying a leader should know how to diagnose someone with like imposter syndrome. Like, I think you're suffering from this. It's not that. It's more, obviously you're noticing it. Maybe you've experienced it yourself as a leader. And now you're seeing this, you know, up and comer or junior player on your team that's struggling, maybe not volunteering. What can they, you know, be doing to help shift that for that person and support them?
So, for the individual who experiences imposter syndrome, a large part of the inner voice is really tearing you down and telling you you're not good enough. And so, as you start to change that, you do need some outside cheerleaders to be able to support you in that sense before you start to build up your own inner cheerleader or your inner wise one, whatever you choose to call it.
Right.
And if you are that leader and you start to notice it where someone is exhibiting certain behaviors where they're trying to not push themselves outside of their comfort zone, or if you notice them coming really early and staying late all the time, but it's affecting their stress levels as well. Or if you start to notice the opposite side where now they're pulling back because they feel like they just can't do something, or there's a bit of burnout in there as well, then being able to recognize and may not calling them out, or you could even start that conversation by saying, hey, once upon a time, I experienced this and I'm starting to notice that this is what you're doing. And when you start to provide examples, now you're showing that you've sat and observed their behaviors and you give them the opportunity to say, hey, let me support you in making that next step. So if you don't feel like your confidence is up there, well, let me help support you and your confidence as we start to build it up again.
Yeah.
And as that leader, again, you don't have to go in. So first off, let's actually clarify. So imposter syndrome isn't a psychiatric disorder.
Okay,
It's
great.
actually,
I'm like,
yeah.
so like you're not diagnosing anything, but you're also not,
No,
you know, having to worry that it is a disorder. Yeah.
exactly. So it's not established as a psychiatric disorder. And so that's where there's a big misconception around it. It's feelings and experiences and behaviors that can contribute to us staying stuck. And so when I talk about or when I teach on the imposter cycle, we then I actually say to, well, it's the high achiever with a loud inner critic. So I call it the hack cycle. And essentially what we end up doing is we hack the cycle later on, because then that gives us the opportunity to be able to create checkpoints along the way. So whether it's creating time blocks or resetting our expectations, implementing boundaries, learning how to brag about our successes, share those facts, that gives us the opportunity to then be able to step into and understand, okay, a checkpoint is going to be able to give me the opportunity to get out of this cycle. Right. So for the leader, if you notice along the way where your employee or team member is getting stuck, then you can guide them in that way to say, okay, why don't we try this differently next time? So then you're not repeating the exact same behaviors and then getting stuck in those behaviors time and time again.
Yeah, I love that. I'm also hearing from you, like if there's this hack cycle, as you call it.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, I need to put some boundaries in place. I need to do this. I need to do this. As a leader, maybe I also anticipate that my team's going to need this at some point or another.
Yeah.
And it's just like, okay, so what are our team boundaries, right? What are our team like work preferences so that
Mhm.
we can just get that out on the table versus waiting until there's a mishap and then we have to course correct and make people feel bad about themselves, or
Yep.
someone doesn't want to volunteer, that they're not feeling confident. It's like, yeah, as a leader, you can troubleshoot and you can clean things up, or you can also get ahead of it and anticipate that chances are, especially if your organization is going through a lot of change.
Yes.
What organization hasn't gone through change in the last like 3 years, specifically with
Yep.
pandemics and all these other things we're dealing with? So like get ahead of that.
Mhm.
Anticipate that, people on your team may struggle. Well, and this is this link that you talk about, this imposter syndrome, perfectionism, burnout. So if I'm experiencing imposter syndrome due to some latent like perfectionism from my
Mhm.
teenage years that keeps coming forward into my adult years,
Yep.
and then I just keep in this constant loop, I'm now churning, burning, going in through this burnout phase. So leaders out there, get ahead of this and know that some of our employees out there will be struggling with this.
Mhm. And they may be your top performers. And that's why it's really important to pay
Oh
attention
yeah.
to everyone
Yeah.
on your team, and not just, maybe you notice someone is more blatantly struggling, but it can affect those top performers. So,
I'm
one
like
of the
raising my
stats,
hand. Like that was me
right?
fully. Like the top performer that's like hacking her way through it, thinking of like
Yep.
creative ways to like survive. But
Mhm.
meanwhile, totally stressed out, burnt out. Yeah.
Exactly.
And no one
And so
noticing because I was still producing results.
And that's exactly it. So when I was initially diagnosed with depression and an anxiety disorder and burnout, I sat on local, provincial, national organizations. I was a full-time staff dentist. I was just about to buy into a dental clinic. I was doing all the things. And so to me, I was just like, you can't diagnose me with this because this doesn't make any sense. I was doing all the things. However, was doing all the things that led me to burnout too.
Right.
So when you are that top performer, you get to take a look and say, okay, am I doing all the things, but also being able to take care of myself? And one of the statistics that I had come across is that if you experience imposter syndrome with perfectionism, you are more likely to develop psychological distress, ultimately leading to burnout. So if we know that that exists and you see perfectionists in your team, then you get to teach them ways that, okay, we're not striving for perfection here, we're striving for excellence. How do
Right.
we reset those expectations?
Yeah.
How do we reflect after challenges and mistakes so we're not ruminating and saying that, oh my goodness, I can never do it again? We have to give ourselves the opportunity to support those individuals, not just thinking that because they're checking all the boxes that they're fine.
Yeah. And celebrating those successes.
Yeah.
Kind of like as a
Yeah.
team, right? Versus us like, okay, what next? What next? What next? Which
Yes.
again, I think is, I mean, definitely we had those cultural situations happening in organizations prior to the pandemic. I mean, I think all the warts just kind of like rose to the surface, but that was
Yep.
it. It's like, you could hide behind Zoom, all that sort of stuff too, when you're working from home. But now it's like kind of coming to the surface that, after people have been packing this down, it's definitely rising up. Um, Question for you, because we talked about
Mm-hmm.
boundaries before, um, and that being like sort of like one of those key things to kind of get out of that hack loop. This is a personal disclosure on your part if you feel comfortable sharing, but like when have you tried to set boundaries in your life and it backfired?
Mm. So I'm going to talk about from a family perspective because
Oh, interesting.
yeah, so boundaries are important at work, with friends, with your partner, with family, and what that looks like. And so for me, it was so important to set a boundary with my mom. And so my mom is bipolar, and I've been a part of her life as the caregiver for a very long time. And when I was diagnosed with burnout, there's different types of burnout, and I was diagnosed with caregiver burnout. And during that time, I had to implement boundaries so then she wasn't the sole focus. My patients weren't the sole focus at the cancer center, that I actually chose to take care of me. So, a boundary in particular is we can get into, so being Italian,
Squeaky toy in the background.
so being Italian, it is super easy for me to get to that next level of like passionate, heated, angry conversation. And especially right before bed. That was one thing, because then now it's taking me additional hours to be able to calm my own nervous system, to be able to go to sleep. So, something that I had to implement with my mother in particular, because I felt like I was having repeated conversations, and she'll attest to this. We were very open. I write about it in my book as well. And I had to say, I'm like, listen, after 7 p.m., we can't talk on the phone anymore.
Right.
And so to me, that was a physical boundary.
Mhm.
And there were times where it got pushed and shoved, and even to this day. And I have to make sure that I'm in the right headspace when I'm going into that conversation.
Right.
So then that way, I know my sleep's not affected. Otherwise, what ends up happening is then I hang up the phone and I'm like, okay, well, what am I going to do now? Well, I
Yeah.
can't fix anything at this point. And then I'm frustrated and flustered and angry. And I realize that's not every conversation. However, I can't predict when those conversations are going to happen. So,
Right.
because of that, I put in a physical boundary. I also talk about, and what I do is I find creating those psychological boundaries. And those psychological boundaries are you deciding. So, one thing in particular is I have to make sure I end my work day. Otherwise, because I love what I do, I could
Mhm.
just keep on working and working and working. So for me, when I hit a certain point in the day, me shutting off my computer, and I have to take like 15 seconds sitting in front of it saying, the computer is now off. That is a sign to me that my work day is done. I get to go and do whatever else I want.
Yeah.
And whether that
Uh,
is later in the evening, midday, in the morning, whatever your work day looks like, creating that boundary. Because now it's not like, oh, wait, but I was waiting on that email to come in, or potentially a phone call, or what if so and so messages me? And it's like, that can wait until the next day.
mhm.
And so creating those boundaries gives us the opportunity to then be able to say, okay, this is the line that I'm drawing in the sand. And if someone tries to push back, I have to remind myself why that boundary is there to begin with.
I love that. I often talk about it with my clients too, believing hard enough in whatever goal you're trying or vision, so
Mm-hmm.
you're waiting for that call, you're waiting for that email. Should I just work until I get it? It's just like, it's, if you believe hard enough, I think in the vision that you're trying to create, that work is trying to support, it's going to happen. The call is going to
Yeah,
happen. You're going to get that sale. You're going to get that offer through. It's not a matter of like, I have to like work it to the bone at all costs right now. Believe
yep,
hard enough in the vision and the work will happen. Whether you work 5 hours today or 8 hours tomorrow, it's not going to matter. It's going to happen
exactly.
because you believe hard enough in the vision. So no, my dog's waking up. That happens. Um, okay, I wanted to ask you, because our whole call is all about three uniques.
Yeah.
So what are the three things that make you unique in what
Mm-hmm.
you do and what you love and your purpose in the world?
So one of them is my energy, and I didn't realize it until my patient said something. So working at the cancer center, at times it can feel like it's doom and gloom, but I always made a point that I was never going to walk into a room with that doom and gloom. And so even if that meant, yeah, you were coming to see the dentist and quote unquote, I'm just the dentist, but at the same time, I was going to make sure that me being a part of that individual's journey is that I was able to leave a lasting impression that helped them process, helped them from a positivity standpoint. And because at times it is shit as you're going through your cancer treatment. And so if I could be that little bit of energy, whether it was just support, positivity, relating, whatever it was. And so it was a patient of mine who said to me one day, do you walk into the room like this every time? And I was like, what do you mean? He's like, you walk in and the energy in here changes. And I was like, oh, I guess, yeah, that's just me. And he's just like, oh my, I want to thank you for that. And so I started to pay attention to that. And when I paid attention to it, I had more people say it. And I was like, whoa. So that is definitely one, I would say that's one of my top uniques. My second is the fact that I love to listen. So when someone is going through something challenging and feels comfortable being vulnerable with me to share what's going on, I am going to sit there and I'm going to listen. We may not find a solution, but if you need to get out whatever is in there, I'm going to sit and listen. And then the third aspect
Mhm.
is kind of goes with the energy, but it's my laughter. It is one of those aspects that when I not only bring that energy aspect of it, you are going to see me with a smile. You're going to be seeing me laughing. You're going to be seeing, so a combination of the energy, my laughing, and listening, that is what makes me truly unique.
Amazing. That's so great. And the fact that you're also able to like weave it into your experiences through work and how you,
Mhm.
work with your clients that way. How do you keep that energy? Like, so, based off of the past examples going into the cancer
Mhm.
clinic, every week, but just now, like you're not necessarily going to that environment. How do you keep that energy going, even when you're confronted with, say, something that is sucking that energy out of you?
Mhm. So that is something that I've had to process, and I feel like we will always process that as high achievers is what ends up happening when there's those challenges, mistakes, or just unforeseen circumstances that can pull on your energy. And it's reminding myself that if I'm not having the greatest day, or if I'm feeling more heavier emotions, or whatever it is at that point in time, it's recognizing that, well, this isn't going to last indefinitely, what I'm feeling in that moment. And then I get to ask myself, what do I need for me right now? And that allows me to tap into self compassion. So then, yes, I'm problem solving and figuring out what needs to be figured out and putting out those fires. But at the same time, I'm also asking myself, okay, but in order to put out those fires, what do you need? Do you need to move a little bit slower? Maybe you had a really bad sleep last night. And if that's the case, okay, you're going to process things a little bit slower. Give yourself the patience to be able to do that. If something upsetting truly comes in, and then I get to decide at that point in time, okay, if I'm not going to be able to show up as me, then do I get to take time for me to look inwards and give myself that space? And I know COVID actually showed me, as much as I'm an extrovert and I love standing on the stage and speaking and stuff, I am an introvert inside, and I need that alone time to be able to process, to sit, to just read, to watch TV, to listen to some music. And because I know me, and because I've asked myself, what is it exactly that I need? It gives me the opportunity to embrace the shit storms that happen at times without losing myself entirely.
Love it. Yeah. I've definitely push myself into that area of extrovert. I think I've always been sort of on the cusp of either or. I mean, and everyone
Mm-hmm.
has a bit of both. But I think it was almost more like I had to be the extrovert, right? Like it was just something that was part of my family upbringing. It was part of the
Mm-hmm.
conditioning of the family, the jobs that I was in. It's like if you weren't in that extrovert role, you weren't going to be successful. But now I think as I get, older in life, it's like I love the introvert in me. Like I love it when
Mm-hmm.
she needs her time. And I'm pretty confident in requesting that. And I just know myself. But it's so amazing to just like embellish her. Like when she like when I get that quiet time to recharge, it just feels so good. So that's awesome that you recognize that for yourself. Um, what's next? What's happening this year for you that's like really like a goal that you're working on that you're really inspired by,
Mm-hmm.
but also maybe a little freaked out about because goals should kind of freak you out sometimes too. I'm okay with that.
I know. I was at a conference in October, and they were calling them the big, sweaty, hairy, stretchy goals. And I was just like, that is exactly what they are, because they are. They're pushing you
Okay,
outside.
that's cool. I don't call them like so many adjectives. I just call them
Yeah.
big and juicy goals.
Big and juicy goals. And I love it because it does. It makes you stretch. It makes you sweat. It has you questioning at times. And one of that is expanding my consulting business. So actually, I'm going to add in a fourth unique. So a fourth unique for me is being able to take things from a bird's eye view, be able to examine everything, and then start to piece by piece figure out how to problem solve and how to make things or improve things. And I found that back when I was 20, I had a late diagnosis of a learning disability, specifically in reading comprehension. And so I had to learn how to learn all over again during that time. And at that point, I thought I was at a disadvantage. I was just like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this. I'm never going to make it into dentistry and all of these qualms. But because of that learning disability, I turned it into a huge strength because it gave me the opportunity to be able to develop this view of being able to see such incredible things from bird's eye view and say, okay, why isn't this working? How do we unpack it? How do we unravel it? And then how do we put it back together in a different way? And so with the consulting business and with the way that workplace culture has been shifting, we had the great resignation, then we have buzzwords like quiet quitting,
Yeah.
which to me is just another form of burnout. And so to me, we'll save that for another time to
Yeah.
talk about. But essentially, what I'll be doing, which is expanding that consulting business to really help companies build out their workplace culture and their leadership. Because what you said early on is COVID amplified and accelerated what wasn't working. And now that it's in the forefront, we can't hide it anymore.
Yeah.
And that is what I'm going to be doing with my consulting business.
Amazing. So I have one more question for you before we
Yeah.
wrap up. But before I do, where can people find you? Where can they get your book?
Yeah, so they can check out my book on Amazon, Speak Kindly, You're Listening. And you can also find it through my website, which is www.drjessicametcalfe.com.
Okay. And we'll make sure we put that all in the show notes and stuff. So my last question for you is, if I was to give you a billboard and you could put anything on it and it could be anywhere in the world, what would it say and where would it be?
Oh, okay. So it would totally say, Speak Kindly, You're Listening.
Okay, there you go.
That is definitely because even if you didn't realize that it's an association with a book or a consulting firm or whatever it is, that makes you question being like, how do I actually speak to myself? And where would it be? It'd probably be on an island where it wouldn't necessarily be seen by everyone. I'm such an island person, so probably out in one of the Greek islands, just as a reminder to people who come to visit that, okay, I get to do a little introspection when I take time for myself in this quieter place.
I love it. Yeah, when you're walking down to the beach or something, just as a last
Yeah,
reminder.
exactly,
Amazing.
exactly.
Jessica, thanks so much for being on today. I really appreciate you coming in and sharing more about you and just the whole process of you getting to where you are, and the help that you're providing to people is amazing.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. And I really appreciate what you're doing by sharing others' three uniques as well. So thank you.
Thanks. And everyone listening, as Jessica just sort of wrapped up, she said it very well. Get out there and share your three uniques. You never know who's listening, and the world needs what you've got. Take care, everyone.